back to Hot Roster yesterday, Cam, because we are breaking down a card that was available to you on HotRoster.com yesterday. It was the Hot Roster Today card number 3. Version 3, important. With some good matchups on it. Some of them turned out to be kind of one-sided, but they provide us with at least an interesting perspective of what's going on, specifically in Week 9. And one of those was Des Bryant versus Brandon Marshall. Marshall was the half-point fantasy underdog. No one scored anything in this contest, but it might tell us a lot about, and we talked about Dallas a lot in the opening segment. We talked about Zeke. We talked about Dak. You brought up Cole Beasley, which I think is a very interesting point. Right now, Cole Beasley and Mike Evans are the only two wide receivers in football to tally at least 50 yards in every single game. Now, as I mentioned with Dak, if you're only throwing the ball on 40% of your snaps in any given contest, and Beasley's going to get his, and I know it was a great matchup for Witten, too. Like, Cleveland is terrible against tight ends, so everything's set up for Witten. 4 targets for Dez. One catch.
19 yards.
Like, yeah.
That's actually, we were right in this one. I think I liked Marshall even against your Miami Dolphins there, Garion. And 4.9 over to 1.9 is brutal. But I will go with Marshall because we just don't know. With this Dallas Cowboys team, sure, Dez is going to have his games, but we're going to see a lot of 2 for 34, 3. You know what I mean? There's so many other guys. You said it. Mouths to feed. The percentage, Ezekiel Elliott getting the ball. I don't like the situation for him. And on Hot Roster, anytime he's up against somebody big, I will go against him most of the time because this is I could see a lot of this in the future.
Yeah, especially if he's going to be needing points to cover.
Yes.
Like, that's kind of an insane
I don't
spot
want him
for
as
him
a
right
favorite
now.
ever.
Like, I know he had 14 targets the week prior coming into this, and that's a lot of volume. And we'll talk a little bit about volume with Allen Robinson in a second, but at some point, that's going to come through, and I know he kind of dropped a touchdown in this game as well. So there was a chance here to turn this thing around. Also, if we're looking forward, any concern with Brandon Marshall and the fact that Fitz has the MCL sprain and maybe he's not 100%? Does a name like Bryce Petty scare you, or are you kind of into Bryce Petty?
I like Bryce.
Yeah, I was going to say.
You know what? Bryce Petty came in there and didn't look that bad.
No, it was like 2 plays.
I would rather see Bryce Petty than Geno Smith out there, I could tell you that.
That is true. I would agree with that. Okay, so speaking about volume, so we had Brandon Cooks against Allen Robinson. Robinson was a 1.5-point underdog, which is kind of crazy for a guy who was a consensus top 10 pick coming into the year. We know your thoughts on Blake Bortles, Cam, and once again we saw it. The garbage man comes through with a backdoor cover in the fourth quarter.
He is the biggest garbage man in the league, this guy.
But Allen Robinson, among receivers the last 2 weeks, actually leads all WRs with 27 targets. Now, he's only caught 13 of those. So the ratio isn't there necessarily, but he's still getting the looks, even if it's from I have to bring it down to my knee before I put it over my shoulder, Blake Bortles.
Yep.
I mean, how do you kind of like judge Allen Robinson going on the rest of the season?
You said it though, Gary. In the last couple of weeks, I'm starting to see Robinson take flight. You know, he's getting more targets, more catches. The catch in the game too was absolutely stellar.
Yeah.
Not on a great ball. Robinson made it happen. So he's that guy. We expected him to be the red zone monster. As for Brandon Cooks, we have a concern here in New Orleans because Drew Brees loves to spread it around to everybody. And right now, Michael Thomas is the guy who's been great too. He's been making fantastic catches. He's a red zone presence. So I'm very concerned if you have Cooks in matchups because New Orleans, they like to really give it around. Whereas I'm telling you, Allen Robinson, I could see a guy trending upwards now. Last couple of games, you have to be pretty happy.
Definitely. And I think that for Robinson owners, I know a lot of people were talking about like selling this guy. We're talking about dropping this guy. He was a primo train candidate. Yeah, you got to keep him on your team now. But it's the volume thing. It's not pretty volume, but it's volume, and sometimes that's all you need. Dante Moncrief against Jordan Matthews. This is another kind of interesting one. Matthews was the half-point fantasy underdog. Bulk for Matthews, but Moncrief gets the touchdown, so he wins this one 11.5 fantasy points to 8.8.
Are you worried about Carson Wentz, his regression? Because he hasn't looked like the same guy, Garion.
He's looked really bad. In fact, coming into that contest, I know he actually set a career high in yardage in that game because it sort of got out of hand. They needed to pass the entire second half.
He was brutal in the first couple drives, and the Giants took advantage.
Terrible in those first couple of drives when it mattered the most. And also, before that contest, the Eagles were actually, as an offense, the last 3 weeks, registering the lowest amount of yardage per game. The only quarterback who was averaging less yards per attempt than Carson Wentz during that span was a guy by the name of Brock Osweiler. That is not company you want to keep.
You don't want to be
at
anywhere
all.
near Brock Osweiler.
So right now, Jordan Matthews, like his upside is just capped. Like he's gonna have the short routes he runs. He's gonna be a target. Like he's got a ton of targets in these contests, but just none of them are like overly viable fantasy targets. Like, they're not.
I see Moncrief down the stretch doing some big things. Big win for the Colts on the road in Lambeau there.
Yeah, and also Moncrief now has a touchdown in 8 of his 11 career games with Andrew Luck. And before we get out of here, Cam, we'll talk about that Barnage one. He was a full point.
I apologize. People on HotRoster,
Yeah.
we made some good picks, like 3 and 2 in the things, but I got to tell you, I love Barnage over Ebron. Man, was I wrong, Gary.
Well, here's the thing about this, and we could talk about Ebron and how he's sort of coming out of his shell a little bit. And I think this goes back to what we were talking about with Stafford in the first block, where he's just a guy who presents himself in a shorter route capacity than a guy like Marvin Jones. Like, Stafford right now is looking to check down. So Ebron, that means good things for him. We know he's talented. He was a former first-round pick. That's all great. Barnage specifically, Cleveland ran a season-low 44 offensive plays in that game. And we talk about how Dallas can just take the air out of the football.
They do.
That's not going to happen all the time with Cleveland. But Corey Coleman was definitely a part of that offense. Terrell Pryor, definitely a part of that offense. Andrew Hawkins was still getting targets. So maybe there's not enough to go around there and keep Barnage viable.
Okay, but I don't know. I really like the matchup. I expected bigger things, and Ebron got it done against the Vikings defense. These guys are starting to look very, very normal with all the injuries back there.
Well, it's tough.
They're beat up. They're beat up.
And also when your offense can't move the ball at all, and you're on the field all the time, it kind of hurts a little bit. Okay, when we come back on Hot Roster today, Cam and I are going to break down another card of our own creation, the Week 10 waiver wire card. I'll talk about some guys you should be targeting in your season-long leagues when we come back.